Welcome everyone. My name is Sandra and I'm the director of the BC AdventureSmart program. We're so glad to have you here tonight for one of our very special events. And I'm grateful to be joining you tonight from the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically from the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. We've had a busy winter of webinars, delivering our curriculum and sharing so much information with enthusiasts like yourself. Tonight's special. And our guest is going to bring you some really excellent detailed information so that you can learn more about lost person behavior. Dr. Robert Kester's contributions to search and rescue include seminal research on lost person behavior. He is the author of Lost Person Behavior. I've got the edition in my kitchen there. He has published numerous articles on search and rescue. He has presented this subject in Aruba, Australia, Canada, Iceland, Ireland, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Well-traveled. Our renowned guest holds a Master of Science degree in biology. He is an incident commander, instructor for the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, and past president of the Virginia Search and Rescue Council for 15 years. Dr. Kester has also worked with the United States Coast Guard, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, National Park Service, and Federal Emergency Management Agency. On behalf of the BC AdventureSmart program, we'd like to welcome Dr. Kester, and this just adds value to the information that we provide as well. We always encourage people to follow the 3 T's. We want you to trip plan, train, and take those essentials, and collectively we can all help reduce the number and severity of search and rescue incidents right here in British Columbia, where we have 3,000 search and rescue volunteers who respond to over 1,900 search and rescue incidents just in British Columbia. And there's a vast amount of search and rescue volunteers right across Canada. Dr. Kester, you're welcome to turn your camera on and join us. Hope everyone's comfortable, and as Dr. Kester gets ready there, you're welcome to toss into the question field on your dashboard where you're sitting tonight. We're really curious where everyone is. As I mentioned, I'm here in the lower mainland of British Columbia, specifically North Vancouver. We'd love to know where you are. You can put your questions in the question, you can put your location in the question, and then as we get to the end of the presentation, we will field your questions and Dr. Kester can answer those for you. And then we have a special prize for everyone who attends. If you stick around to the end, we have a wonderful gift for you. Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Kester. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Do I need to hit show screen, or are you able to see the slideshow?
Thanks, Dr. Kester. Yeah, just hit that play button again, and then we'll be able to see the slideshow. Excellent.
Great. Are we ready? So I'm Robert Kester. I usually go by Bob for people who meet me in person, and I'm not sure if these virtual meetings count as in person or not, but certainly happy to be here and happy for the kind introduction. So it kind of covers everything on what I affectionately call the I love me screen of all the stuff I've done over the years. So with that, we will just get started with lost person behavior. Now, there's kind of one story where the founder of Boy Scouts asked a bunch of scouts, how many of you have ever been lost? And most of the hands actually went up, but a few didn't. And he said, of those of you who have not been lost, you fall in one of 2 categories. A, you just haven't spent enough time in the outdoors, or B, you're a liar. So with that, I'll get started. I will see what I have to click. There we go. So lost person behavior answers the central question of where is the lost person? Because certainly if you're in search and rescue, that is where you want to send your teams. So where should somebody look? I would say, look where the subject is. But if it's a search, you really don't know where the subject is because it's a search. If you do know where the subject is, it's a rescue, and that's a whole nother issue. Well, since we don't know where the subject is, it doesn't sound cool to go around saying, I don't know where they are. So we assign probabilities called probability of area or probability of containment. So one area might have like 10% chance. Another area could have a 25% chance. But some areas could be larger than other areas. Shouldn't you take that into consideration? Well, sure you should. That's called probability density. And aren't some areas easy to search and some areas hard to search? And yes, that can be taken into consideration as well. So in search theory, that would be what's known as the probability of success rate. So some of the important where questions that helps us determine where to put our resources is certainly, where was the subject last seen? That would be an example of an initial planning point or a place last seen. Or sometimes we just find the car and then it's a last known point. Do we know where the subject was headed? Oh, the importance of having a trip plan. And then hopefully the person followed the trip plan, but we kind of know the trip plan wasn't followed completely because the person didn't come back. Where has the subject been lost before? They'll probably repeat a similar pattern if they have. Where have similar subjects gone when they're lost? That's actually the basis of my research. I have a database of, I guess it's up to 160,000 lost person incidents. And I just characterize what other similar people in similar circumstances did. So where have similar subjects been found? Where is the subject right now? I mean, that really is the central question. We'll talk about scenario planning to try to figure out where the subject is now. And ultimately, it comes down to, where will I actually send my search and rescue resources to hopefully find them? Everything in search and rescue starts with basic investigation. What is the thumbnail description of why they went lost? They went hiking, last seen at a trailhead. Their destination was top-notch mountain. It's like, okay, we have a hiker. We know where they started from, and we know their destination. We can go ahead and now look up statistics for missing hikers. And that will be enough to get our search started. And then we'll continue the investigation and start to build the unique profile of the person we're actually looking for. That will give us a search area. Once we have a search area, we start searching it with something known as reflex tasks. We hope to find clues, with the missing subject being the ultimate clue. And if that doesn't work, then we have to do some fancy stuff called search theory, which I'll only touch upon briefly in this talk. And hopefully we find the missing person. U.S. Department of Homeland Security gave me a bunch of money. They paid for this slide, so this is what they get. What my kind of, I guess, cycle is I started by collecting data called ISRID. That's the International Search and Rescue Incident Database. That gives me lots of statistics, and then able to write books, make apps, make software that search and rescue resources actually will use out in the field. Once they find the subject, there's a data collection piece of web interface called SARCAT, and that feeds back into the actual database, which is essentially, it basically means it's lost people contributing to search and rescue teams to find other lost people. So the ISRID database started in 2002, initially collected 50,000 cases. That's what the book Lost Person Behavior is actually based upon. In 2013, secured a little bit more funding, collected an additional 10,000 cases. So that brings the database up to 150,000. This last year, I've been collecting some additional data So far, I got 15,000 additional cases, but I probably will get another 30,000 cases as I get ready to update the book. Certainly, it is an international database with a strong emphasis on people who can speak English, because that's what I speak. Although there is a version of the Lost Person Behavior book available in French as well. Certainly in British Columbia, you have all the sort of the major domains or eco-domains. You have temperate, you have polar, and you have dry, all in the province. And the data is actually split up because people will behave differently in temperate mountains, differently in polar regions, and different in dry regions. So I briefly mentioned there's 2 books I've written that are out there. Lost Person Behavior book based upon 50,000 cases. The Endangered and Vulnerable Adults and Children is more urban-based type of cases. That's based upon the 150,000 cases. And I'm in the process, and I've been in the process for about a year or 2, of writing the 2nd edition to the Lost Person Behavior book. So some various myths and legends that are out there that I come across a fair bit is, do subjects turn in the direction of the dominant hand? And can we use that information in search and rescue? I don't have a poll, but think to yourself. And the answer is, it's fiction. It has nothing to do with it. Saratok in '94 looked at it, doesn't help. I looked at it in the early '90s, doesn't help. Silverstein and Salmons are researchers who looked at it for dementia subjects, doesn't help. But why do we think this? Well, there is actually a basis to the myth. In the United States, and I imagine in Canada as well, 70% of left-handed people will generally turn left when essentially in a maze like a rat. It was an experiment done actually in a library. And essentially 70% of right-handed people will turn right. But when they repeated the experiment in Great Britain, where they drive on the other side of the road, and that changes people's behavior a little bit, left-handed people still 70% to the left, but now over in the UK, only 50% of right-handed people will turn right. Turns out it has nothing to do in search and rescue because there's too many other variables. If it's downhill, people are more likely to go downhill. If the wind is blowing, you're more likely to turn away from the wind. If one side of your strap on your backpack is adjusted to be a little bit more heavy, that will influence which way you're going to turn. If you see a bunch of briars to the left, you're more likely to go to the right, and vice versa. So search and rescue, knowing if the person's left-handed or right-handed doesn't help us at all. Well, how about, do lost subjects walk in circles? And the answer to that is yes, they certainly can. In the first experiment, they got a nice flat setting of a basketball arena, and they blindfolded a bunch of volunteers. This is what you do with college psychology students. And they said, okay, try to walk in a straight line. And as you can see, they don't really do a great job of walking in a straight line. Probably one of the interesting things to note here is the same person will walk sometimes clockwise and sometimes counterclockwise. So that means you can't even predict which way they're going to circle, because they can circle any which way at any point in time. Now you could say, well, lost people typically aren't actually blindfolded, we hope. So another experiment was done in the woods during the daytime, and the yellow lines represent daytime and the arrows represent where the sun was. And SM actually did a perfectly fine job of walking in a straight line. And MJ did a fine job of walking in a straight line until they got to the edge of the woods and had to be turned back. It's like, get back in the woods with you. And they walked a straight line. However, if you look at RF, PS, and KS, and AY, all of which have dark blue lines, they were instructed to walk in a straight line at night in the woods. And you can certainly see they did, in fact, walk in circles. Same experiment was repeated in the desert during the daytime. KB did a pretty good job of walking in a straight line, although they initially got off by about 45 degrees. And IK did a good job of walking in a straight line. The sun was out pretty much directly overhead. SK did the experiment at night, started off doing a fine job because there was a full moon, but then the full moon went behind a cloud. And sure enough, it didn't take that long. Within about 15 to 20 minutes, SK had done a 180-degree half circle once they lost any kind of landmark. So let's look at hikers. So this is what we kind of have learned about hikers and how they get lost. Hikers are typically oriented to trails. When they do get lost, the most common reason for getting lost, which accounts for 68%, is because they get lost versus some of the other scenarios like being overdue or trauma or medical reasons. And we're going to be talking about decision points and how those impact things. They essentially make a mistake, then they don't think they make mistakes, so they're guided by terrain, following other linear features in most of the cases. We're starting to see, once they do realize they're lost, a lot of them will just head uphill in an attempt to get a cell phone signal. Certainly about 30 or 40% of them will travel at night. 16% are reported missing because they were simply overdue. So I mentioned this was a case of a 16-year-old backpacker. She was in a kind of a guided experiential adventure course for youths who had troubles. She was lagging behind because she was out of shape, and her counselors just kind of said, well, catch up with us if you want dinner. Well, she never did catch up. The IPP was the initial planning point where she was last seen. The first circle you see is the first decision point. The trail makes a sharp right-hand turn on top of a saddle. The arrow is, if she just kept going the same general direction, she'd wind up in that stream. Second decision point, trail kind of bears a little bit to the left. Third decision point, there's an intersection with another trail where if she really kind of kept going straight, she'd probably go on that other trail. Fourth decision point is a little road that goes off to it was a barn. So decision points can be sharp turns and trails. They can be game trails. They can be starts of drainages. They can be saddles. They can be switchbacks. There's lots of different potential decision points where if you're not paying attention, especially if you're hiking kind of tired with a head down gaze, it's easy to get off the trail. So where do you think she went off the trail? Decision point 1, 2, 3. Most people pick 3. 4, a lot of people like 4, but it does turn out to be decision point number 1 is where she made her mistake. Potential things to do if you make a mistake there. The most likely thing, it's kind of a person in motion tends to stay in motion, is she'd eventually fall down and get sucked up into the drainage and follow the creek out. She might have found a game trail that heads up to that summit, 3707, or she could have gone the other way as well. what she wound up doing was going into the drainage, and she was located just a little bit below the A there in the word national, which is a whole nother story. Once people get off the trail, they usually get this funny feeling that something isn't quite right, but we so love to be right and take mental shortcuts known as heuristics that it's easy to get tricked into thinking that all what we need to do is just keep going. So there's availability heuristic. It's a tendency to estimate risks upon how many examples come to mind quickly. And, you know, most of the time when you are feeling a little bit not sure of yourself, usually everything works out just fine. So you just think everything will work out just fine. Confirmation bias is a tendency to listen to information that confirms you're right and ignore stuff that you don't agree with. Like, gee, my compass says I'm going the wrong direction. My compass must be wrong. The Dunning-Kruger effect is subjects with low ability and limited knowledge or competence are the ones who think they know the most about what they're doing. Optimism bias is, well, everything will work out. I'll just keep going this way. And then the sunk cost fallacy is, once we put some effort into going, well, I know this is the wrong way, but I've been going this way long enough that I'm sure something will appear over the next ridge. Eventually, you'd realize, oh my gosh, I'm lost. Then that puts you in a full flight or fright or freeze physiological state, and it alters your memory and mental state or cognitive state as well. There'll be a decrease in your short-term memory. There'll be a decrease in your ability to concentrate. There'll be a decrease in your ability to problem solve. Hence, probably the most important thing that people do once they realize they're lost is, you know, stop, think, observe, plan. That's what we teach in the States. For military pilots that are shot down, the first thing they're taught is to sit on their butt and drink some water and then immediately come up with a plan. But that stopping can kind of break this flight or fright mode. And it's hard to make good decisions when you're in this disorganized state and you want to get yourself back to a more optimal state. Then most people, the idea of a blind random panic is kind of more of a myth than reality. Most people will kind of come up with a strategy. Now, random is not a strategy. It's what we see if people are in a panic, or among younger children will sometimes just have random wandering around. It doesn't mean you don't get anywhere, but you don't get anywhere quickly. A lot of people will adopt the strategy of, if I just go this direction long enough, it's sure to work out. Well, you know, only if you've like studied a map before you've gone someplace might it be sure to work out. We've seen subjects walk across perfectly good roads and trails because it wasn't going the right direction. Some people go, well, I don't really want to go up and I don't want to go down, so I'll just contour around. And with that, I'll hopefully come across something, but by contouring, it's a little bit easier. But once again, I've seen somebody, they were going to contour an entire national park, so that wasn't such a great idea. Probably one of the most thing we see among hikers is a route strategy. If I find a route, a trail or a road or a stream or a drainage or a pipeline or a power line, it was built by mankind. I want to get reconnected to mankind, so I'll just follow it. So hopefully you follow it the right direction. Sometimes it could be an old logging road and might be really going nowhere. Some other strategies we see is backtracking. If you immediately catch your mistake and just turn around, and are able to backtrack, that can be a highly effective strategy. Turns out it's not used by that many people. It's one of the rarest strategies. Landmarks. I'll just head for that mountain over there or some other kind of landmark, and then I'll decide what to do. There's all kinds of folk wisdom. Folk wisdom sometimes works in the area it was derived, but when you're in a different area, it may be the worst possible thing you can do. I mean, a lot of people are like, hey, if I go downhill, that will lead to civilization. Well, that's true in some places. In other places, it leads you to swamps, deserts, dry washes, cliffs, waterfalls, places you just generally don't want to be. There's view enhancing. So some people climb a tree to see what's going around, or just climb up a mountain in hopes of getting a cell phone signal. Well, guess what? There may not be a cell phone signal at the top of that mountain. If you have an emergency beacon, that's certainly a great way of being prepared. And if you truly are lost, now may be the time to set off that emergency beacon. And generally, if you had a trip plan and you've told people where you're going, probably the safest thing that will conserve the most energy is just stay put. Make yourself some shelter, keep yourself warm, all those great things that are taught in preventative SAR and survival. Now, there's many different reasons why you may not be coming out of the woods, or why our subject is not coming out of the woods. Could be an avalanche, could be criminal activity. Generally pretty rare, but it could be. The subject could be despondent. Not everybody despondent commits suicide, but some people do. It could be a case of drowning. It could be a case of evading. We see that with younger children and with those that have mental illness. Could be what I call an investigative case. The poor person has left the back country and boarded a plane, train, automobile, found a new best friend. They're not actually in the search area, but of course somebody reported them missing. The subject could be lost, which is what we just kind of was talking about there the most. Could be a medical scenario. They could be overdue. They could be stranded. They could have sprained their ankle. There could be trauma. And then we also classify subjects as being mobile or immobile. For each of these scenarios, it will have its own unique planning and field impact that the field searchers need to keep in mind. So for criminal, it's an aggressive investigation. But since you don't really know, you also have to keep a parallel lost search going. If it's criminal, you need very large-scale maps, and there's an abduction subject category that provides more details. And from a field impact, you probably don't want younger searchers on a search if you're considering criminal activity. And each of the scenarios has its own particular things to keep in mind. And then we conduct what's known as scenario analysis. So you look at your scenario. So this was a scenario of a lost hiker who went to the top of the mountain, which had cliffs all around the top of the mountain. His friends were going to take the trail back, and he was going to go cross country back to the car and see who won the dollar for getting there first. It was the middle of summer, so there was no chance of avalanches. Criminal, I mean, it's a national park. Always something could happen. Further investigation warranted. Despondent, no, we don't know anything. Nothing showing he's despondent. Drowning, there wasn't really any water except a creek down near the bottom, but yeah, we'll certainly check the creek. Evading, if he falls, has a head injury, he might try evading searches. If he becomes hypothermic, he might try to evade searchers, so we have to keep that as a possibility. Investigative causes, hey, he met somebody really interesting on the trail and decided to hook up, whatever. Lost is certainly highly likely, and then we'll think about places where he could be lost. Medical, Healthy 18-year-old, low probability of that. Overdue, he could have, it's just taking him longer on his little cross-country jaunt, possible. Stranded, he could have been cliffed out, so that's possible. And then trauma is highly likely that he fell off a cliff because he didn't have any climbing gear. And then once we have the scenarios, we apply it with actual resources. In the book, there are gobs and gobs of statistical tables that allow searchers to kind of focus on where are they going to look for this lost hiker. I don't think anybody joined tonight's session to look at statistical tables, but they're there. There's each of those represents a model. The ring model is how far the person could have gone. A point model is how many people are found within 100 meters. A dispersion model, if you have a direction of travel, how well does that help you? So all of these statistical models need different inputs in order to run. And each produces a pretty little picture on a map if you have some software. So we have ring models and dispersion models and elevation models, so the likelihood of up or down. Most people, when they get lost, a lot of them aren't really all that far away from a trail. So we have a track offset model, and we have the type of features that they're lost in. What I've spent the last 6 years of my life working on is some search and rescue software that automates this. Searchers draw their task, calculate something called the probability of success rate, which then gives you a number. So search theory comes down to just search the biggest number first. So that's called a decision aid tool. And there's algorithms behind it, but nobody really cares about that. Find is the name of the software. And then it can also generate a pretty picture or a heat map that shows you that the different probable locations our missing hiker could actually be found in. Now, another thing we're interested for really all of our subject categories, and we're going to be talking about hikers and skiers and snowmobilers. And I put up dementia and autism spectrum disorders and missing aircraft just for comparisons. You can actually see our missing skiers tend to probably do the best on our survivability curve. 50% are found still alive after 9 days, and 75% are still alive after 5 days. Our hikers actually have our best long-term survivability. 5% of missing hikers, usually backpackers in all honesty, 5% of missing hikers are still found alive at 24 days. And we can see for snowmobilers, they still do pretty well, but not quite as well. And we can see autism spectrum disorders don't do well at all. And our aircraft, we drop down to only 50% survive the initial crash. And then we're down to only 25% are alive after 2 days. So that's their survivability curve. That's just looking at time and their chance of survivability. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors that are important. Age is the most important factor, and then average temperature, then the hottest temperature, then the coldest temperature, and so on and so on. We can put all these factors into a computer, and we get another decision aid tool that is based upon all those factors to show how long somebody could survive. So, snowshoers. What do snowshoers do? They're typically well dressed, and if they planned the outing, they typically do carry equipment. But in the database, what I wound up seeing was a whole lot of spontaneous trips where the snowshoes arrived via the delivery truck and the person just decided to go snowshoeing. Modern snowshoes certainly do allow inexperienced people to easily use the snowshoes. And if they haven't practiced it and haven't hiked with them before, they quickly realize it's maybe not as easy as they thought. The classic reason why we look for a missing snowshoer is they were lost. And the reason they got lost was it's typically hard to sometimes keep track of the trail. It's quite easy to walk over trails when they're covered with snow. The weather could certainly make it difficult to see the trail. So that's the classic thing. I also saw a lot of people who were overdue because they were out of shape, and it took them a lot longer to walk, so they misestimated the amount of time. Certainly also possible to see avalanches. Otherwise, trauma was pretty rare because if you just fall over in a pair of snowshoes, you just generally fall in snow and get back up. For our missing snowmobilers, it's a whole wide range of experience and equipment. Most will follow trails. Some will go cross country though. Loss was the most common reason. Errors at decision points, weather, darkness. Getting stranded occurred about 25% of the time. So there were breakdowns, running out of gas, getting stuck. Most people wind up staying the night. Staying with the snowmobile is certainly a smart thing to do. It's the much bigger target. And then they usually attempt to walk out the following day. Snowmobiles do account for 41% of avalanche fatalities. High marking is certainly one of those activities that causes a lot of problems. This is data from the polar domain. So in the polar domain, the most common subject for us to look for is in fact missing snowmobilers. And then it's hunters, and then it's water incidents, then it's hikers, then it's despondents. Polar domain isn't always snowy, so it could also be ATVers, anglers, aircraft that crash, and then a whole long list of other stuff. Now, I've hinted at the fact that we have different subject categories in search and rescue, and different subject categories behave in different ways. So we sort of actually use what's known as a hierarchy to figure out what somebody's subject category will be. First of all, are there external forces that's going to impact what the person did? So if you're in an aircraft, it doesn't matter if you have autism or if you have dementia, or if, I mean, for basically you're sitting in an aircraft. So we're going to use the missing aircraft category if an aircraft goes down. If you fall into the water, whether you're a kid or a skier or an angler, you're still in the water, and it's the water that's going to have the significant impacts. If there's no external forces that apply, then we look, is the person on wheels? So this is where the snowmobile would fall into this category. It's probably more important that the person's on a snowmobile than say they had dementia. But if you're not on a snowmobile, then is there a cognitive reason or issue, such as substance intoxication? We don't do that out in the woods now, do we? Medical, head injuries, autism, dementia, despondent, mental illness, intellectual disability, all would fall in that cognitive class. If none of those apply, are we looking for a child? And if it's not a child, then what activity is the person doing? So this is where our hiker and our skier would actually fall into. So speaking of skiers, basically from a search and rescue perspective, we wind up looking for backcountry skiers, especially backcountry skiers who weren't really prepared to go into the back country. They may be well dressed, but they often have minimum equipment. This is where the unprepared to be in the backcountry really plays out, especially if they ski out of bounds. And that is a very common situation we wind up seeing. Lost accounts for the majority of cases, all kinds of reasons people get lost once they've gone out of bounds, wrong trails, missing trails. Weather certainly can be a contributing factor with whiteouts. Skiers do tend to keep moving. Some will build snow shelters. If there is a shelter to break into, it will be broken into. If the moon is out, pretty much guarantee they'll keep moving. Not too surprising that we certainly do see trauma in 17% of the cases. And we also have our Nordic skiers as well. Also well-dressed, usually better equipped, typically in good physical shape, because if you've ever done Nordic skiing, you either get into good shape or decide you don't want to do Nordic skiing anymore. Lost is the most common with 90%. That's the scenario. A lot of people will self-rescue. In the snow, it's very easy to make wrong turns, missing trails, weather conditions. The movement tends to be the same as the alpine skiers. Avalanches may be important. Trauma usually isn't as much of a factor, but when people ski across frozen stuff, always keep in mind that there may be broken ice, and hopefully it doesn't reseal on the person. So looking at kind of the future of SAR, a lot of people say, hey, you know, everybody's going to have like this cell phone that will have a satellite connection. So everybody's essentially going to have a beacon and nobody will get lost anymore. So I hear that a lot. And I usually say, well, you have evidently not met Mr. Murphy or anything that requires a battery. Those things tend to die. And what we don't seem to be running out is people who do silly things and aren't sort of prepared to actually be out there. Nature doesn't care. The wilderness doesn't care. It just will do to you what it will do to you. So search and rescue is going to be around for a long time. I keep working on better data. I'm always trying to collect better data to make better models. So search and rescue folks can make better decisions. But I could tell you the best thing in the world is prevention. And that's what really saves lives. We get better results. And of course, it took me a whole bunch of people to put together all of this data and collect it and clean it and all those kinds of things. So I thank you for your time. And there's my contact data. I'm happy to take emails. I'm pretty easy to find on the web anyhow. And I think we will open the floor to questions now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Kester. I definitely have some questions here from our very broad audience. We have people coming to us. I'm going to scroll right to the top and kind of go down. We have people coming to us from Australia, Prince George, Colorado, Calgary, Comox, Vancouver, Kitimat, Oregon, New Zealand, Chilliwack, Smithers, Lacombe, Alberta. We've got West Vancouver, Whistler, Washington, Arizona. We have people from all over the map. The Kootenays, this is super awesome. Oyama, we've got definitely some members from Nelson, New Zealand. We have somebody from the Philippines joining us as well. Seeing Southern Illinois, Vancouver Island, Terrace, Fredericton. So awesome to see all of these people, you know, all over the States. We've literally got viewers from all over the world with us this evening. And I do have a couple things that I have flagged. I just have to bear with me as I scroll down back into the questions here. A couple teams are asking, is the software, the Find software available for Alaska? And is it available for SAR teams? The question, the Alaska side is from Lisa, and the general side is from Rayanne. So they're both wondering if the software Find is available.
Yes.
Awesome. If would they have to go through their local SAR groups and managers to bring that in?
I mean, that could either just send me an email, or there's a website, www.findsar.com.
Awesome. Next question is from Corey. Is there a digital source of the descriptions and tables of subject categories?
Digital source would easiest way to get the digital version is there's an app called Lost Person Behavior, and it's both in Android and Apple web stores.
Great. Next question is from Claire. Can we clarify what you mean by the polar domain?
Polar domain, let's see, is my slide still showing up on the website?
It is, yes. Yep.
Okay, we just go grab this thing and bring it back to Juke. So if you look at that, the polar domain is the stuff in blue. And it has the little number 130. Also goes without, well, nothing goes without saying. The 120s, everything north of the blue is considered polar. So you could see like Nova Scotia isn't, but Labrador is. Most of Canada is actually polar.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the population of Canada lives where it's temperate because things tend to grow better there.
Yep. Awesome. This is a very specific question to do with dispersion angles from Gage. If we are looking for an autistic 10-year-old, seeing as there is no dispersion angle for autistic children, will we use the dispersion ring from autistic lost persons and the dispersion angle from child 10 to 12?
Oh yeah, what to do when there wasn't enough data. The nice thing is with the reason why we usually don't have dispersion data for folks with autism, because I actually did a more recent paper on this, is folks with autism, even when they have a place in mind of where they want to go to, don't tell anybody where they're actually headed to. So without having a target location, it's hard to know what the dispersion is. With that being said, a lot of times they do in fact have a destination in mind. So if you actually do know what the destination is, using the data for an age appropriate category would probably be an okay thing to do. I always like to say these are models. All models are wrong. Some are actually useful. So using the next best model certainly does give you some help in figuring out what to do.
The next question we have is from Jim. With regards to winter activities, where have you seen the highest fatality rates? I can answer that for here in British Columbia. We see that on snowmobiles here, but I'll let Dr. Kester elaborate down in the US just because that's where your data comes from.
Yeah, you know, I don't memorize any of my data really. I'd have to look it up.
Mm-hmm.
Play with my spreadsheets to find out.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now I have a question from Kia Ora, or so someone from New Zealand, I think. Is there a personal beacon you know is reliable and feel good recommending? This is a nice general question for everybody listening.
You know, there's such a wide range, whether you want to go with a commercial subscription plan that has the advantage of like two-way communication and checking in, or something that doesn't have a subscription plan, which would be your more traditional PLB, personal locator beacon. I would certainly buy a beacon that has a GPS chip in it, because that helps a lot. But I generally try to avoid you know, any specific recommendations. You got to figure out what's right for you.
Yeah, it's very true. Definitely, a lot of the beacons, they have, you know, different functionalities. Some are for marine, some are for being on land. So it's definitely up to the user to look into it. We here at BC AdventureSmart also don't have one or the other that we promote. We've used all of them. We've had experience, so it's pretty neat. So it's up to the user. Yeah, definitely. This is an excellent question from Ariella. How is it possible that people get lost stepping off the trail slightly to go pee? How is it possible to become so disoriented steps away from a trail?
Actually, pretty darn easy. My very next slide was illustrating one of those cases, where here we have Jerry, a 66-year-old, hiking the AT. She had already hiked 650 miles of it, but with a friend. She had a history of disorientation. And I've seen different estimates ranging from 2% all the way up to 20% of the general population has a difficulty with disorientation and essentially, no sense of direction. So in her case, she stepped off the trail to take a bathroom break. She had a habit of taking 80 steps to make sure she was a good distance from the trail. And it only took 20 steps to no longer see the trail. And with that history of disorientation, 80 steps in the wrong direction, it's like, oh my gosh, that didn't work. And then 80 steps in another wrong direction, and then 80 steps in another wrong direction. And then she was horribly, totally lost, but she kept trying to find her way out. And she wasn't found until 2 years later, obviously deceased. So yeah, the decision point was just stepping off the trail anywhere. But like I said, there's between 2 and 20% of the population, depending upon which term you're using, has problems with disorientation. Most people who go hiking with severe disorientation don't go hiking by themselves.
Right, and that's what we like to say at BC AdventureSmart. Always go with a friend. Always make sure that you got somebody with you. That's hiking with a partner is the best course of action. So this is a great question from Heather. You mentioned ecoregion effects, the lost subjects movement. Can you provide an example?
Sure. So there is, the dry domain and the temperate domain. So most of BC is actually temperate, though you got a little corner there that is actually dry. In the dry domain, there's less vegetation. You can typically see greater distances. So in the dry domain, we find people stay in motion twice as long, travel twice as far, and disperse twice as much when you compare like a hiker in the temperate versus a hiker in the dry, or really any of the subject categories. You'll see that relationship of almost a doubling.
Awesome, thank you for that great information. And then this is a good question from Maria. Is there data on the psychological effects of a person who got lost and rescued?
There is. There's certainly. I study more the short-term effects of sort of what their mental state is going through. I kind of decided not to add all of those slides. It was going to make too many psychological words, but I don't necessarily study the long-term effects, which very well may be real, but I'm a search and rescue person. Once we put the person in the ambulance and fill out the forms, our job is done.
Right, yeah, so that's where the data stops with you, definitely. This is a question regarding the app, Lost Person Behavior. Is the mobile app based on your initial research of 50,000 cases or your more recent research of 150,000? And two people have this question.
It is still with the older data. of the 50,000. What I can say is that the data didn't radically change once I went up to 150,000. Kind of took out the incentive of doing all of the work of making the changes, since it's a lot of work. So I will update the app once I put out the second edition of Lost Person Behavior. So just one day you'll see new numbers appear.
Right, and that's what we were chatting about before the presentation, is that second edition of Lost Person Behavior. So that's excellent that you're working away on that. This is a good question from Michael regarding subject profiles. If a missing subject falls along two profiles, which do we lean towards? Maybe just cross-reference between the two profiles and concentrate on similarities, or?
I will say there is no right answer. What I have seen done out in the field, what I'm likely to do, because in my mind it's just a decision aid tool anyhow, is read both and then just sort of glean what I think is relevant from both, and then integrate what that individual is like. I've seen other people say, I'm going to use the profile where they travel the furthest so I don't miss them and make my search go too short. I've seen some people say, I don't have enough resources anyhow, so I'm going to go with the profile where the distance is the shortest. So I say that there's no right or wrong answer. Everything is situational upon the case. But as I said, in most cases, I kind of read both and just blend them in my head. Or I have a piece of software or a spreadsheet that can do the same thing for math geeks out there.
Yes, the fancy technology that can do it for us. This question from Van, I can answer this one. If you're lost and there's no way to communicate with anyone, will you stay put or backtrack? Van, we always want to stay put, and you wouldn't really not have any way to communicate with anyone because you always leave a trip plan before you leave the house. Tell someone where you're going, when you expect to be back, what you've got with you, you know, what you drove there, what you took. And if we always leave a trip plan and we leave those layers, you shouldn't get stuck in that situation where you have no way to communicate with anybody, because we want to make sure that we never get stuck there. I definitely have a couple more questions here. This is from L. Haynes. Have you noticed any significant changes in statistics, distances traveled in recent years due to the prevalence of smart cell phones with mapping apps?
I haven't analyzed the data that way. I will. I have a chapter I haven't written called, like, you know, trends, but I just haven't analyzed the data yet. Certainly, there's been a decrease, you know, a notable decrease in children who get lost because of cell phones, but that's more in an urban area than a wilderness setting. So I'm curious to see what the result will be myself.
That'll be very interesting. And Chris has just reminded us we've had a great busy evening, and I forgot that we have our own app for trip planning. So if you look us up in either the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, just look for AdventureSmart, and we have a trip planning app, super easy to use. It's via email or text. So I am just going to, I'm going to ask one more question here. You know, this is a really valuable question from Adelaide regarding children. What would you suggest to children age 8 and 11 if staying put is not an option, maybe due to weather or need of shelter? So that you'd want to suggest the Hug a Tree program, but I'll let Dr. Kester add anything on to that. And then I'm going to have Sandra come on and thank Dr. Kester for joining us this evening, just because I'm being cognizant of our time tonight.
Yeah, certainly when it comes to the children age group, you really can't try to teach them a technique or strategy to get out of the woods other than the stay put in a safe, secure program. So certainly what the Hug a Tree program teaches, and then pretty much all outdoor safety programs teach the importance of staying put and bringing a whistle with you and telling people where you're going and not going by yourself, and having some kind of emergency shelter with you at all times.
I think that was the last question based on Natasha's cue there. You've had a full time there speaking, Dr. Kester. Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear so much. I'm going to go back and watch that actually, and take some time to watch it closer. This wraps up our evening, but it also wraps up our winter webinar series that we've been doing since mid-November. We've been going through our curriculum. We've had special guests come on from search and rescue groups to subject matter experts in the field to avalanche forecasters. And we are so pleased to wrap up our season with Dr. Kester and such valuable information. Feel free to keep in touch with us. We have more coming. We're going to take some time to plan for the next season and kick off some really exciting special projects we have coming out that will come out in April, so stay tuned. You can watch this again if you choose to, and if you wanted to dig into it further or share it with friends. Everyone who joined us tonight will receive an email with the link with the recording of tonight's session, so you can share it with a friend, and we'll also post it on our social media platforms tomorrow. We have a wonderful little gift for you. So everyone who stuck around to tonight, if you wanted to go to your phone, open up your camera and scan right over that QR code as Natasha puts it up on the screen, and she can make it full screen there. I think it's got a couple pages. It's just the one, no, but FatMap has offered you 1 month free of their services there, and they offer such great product, and they reached out to us recently and offered us this for you. So there's a chance to play around with FatMap and check out their app, and we're grateful for their offerings. We have some opportunities coming up. Stay tuned to our social medias. We're going to channels. We're going to put out some training events for those who want to be volunteer educators with us. That's happening on May 18th. The last question was about children and outdoor safety. We have our Hug a Tree and Survive program, so well sought after throughout the country and in North America, actually. We're putting that one on too. We have registrations for that available. And then our summer events will be posted shortly once we queue them up, bring in guests and set all that up and coordinate it. It takes some time, so we need a couple months to get that going for summer. Enjoy the rest of your winter. Thanks for joining us tonight. On behalf of the BC AdventureSmart team, we thank you for getting informed before you go outdoors, learning a little bit more about your behavior and how you can help reduce the number and severity of search and rescue calls in the province of BC, throughout Canada, and throughout the world, because you joined us from all over the globe tonight. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Shut it. Don't freeze now. Don't freeze now. Are you?